Constantijn, the family of Orange is very innovative. If you look at Bernard, which I know is a nephew of yours, there seem to be a lot of entrepreneurship in your family. Why is that? Where does that come from?
I don't know. I have no idea. You implying that it's either genetic or?
No. But I mean, there's culture there. It's interesting that that they are entrepreneur. There's a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of that. I mean, you're also entrepreneurial. You went to big companies. You went to small companies. Now you're also being very entrepreneurial in being an advocate for the startup companies. And so I thought that was just interesting because normally you would expect your family is more on top of the world, but you're really also trying to be everywhere and innovate the whole parts of society.
Well, maybe because we come from a big institution, and if you're born into a big institution, you want something else. I guess you want more independence, freedom. Maybe that's it. But if Bernard is just a very good entrepreneur. He sees opportunities. He saw it very early on, and what he also did very well. He actually scaled up. Sometimes it's a pity in this country. Then when you're really successful, people then try to pull you down again. But I think no, he's built a business of something like 600 employees, IT company, doing really well. And he did this great trick of selling his company to a corporate that wanted to do something with the internet. And they failed, and then he could buy it back for nothing, and he did the trick 3 times. It's very smart.
I think that's quite entrepreneurial. That's really cool. So let's talk about the thing you're doing now with StartupDelta and how you got there. Because what is your own personal background? You worked for Neelie Kroes, and you worked for big companies, and then suddenly these small companies. Is that because of your experience of working with big institutions?
No, we were doing the digital agenda, so we were on top of a lot of innovations, but we didn't get any traction. It took until Snowden before people started understanding that digital was actually pervasive, and we're not just one of the verticals. So at the time we were looking, it's also kind of a communication tool. Where is their traction? So startups were actually driving a lot of these developments. Nearly all were digitally born, so it was quite logical for us to actually to go to them and talk to them and say, what do you need? So they were our change agents. So we set up a digital leaders club with because what they asked for were role models. So these were the founders of Skype and of Spotify and Rovio, some of the others. And that's actually what started the whole thing.
Okay, so you basically worked in a big institution. You came up with the innovation agenda, and you saw that the big, huge institutions were moving so slow that you said, hey, I need to have more speedboats to help accelerate.
Just an anecdote. In 2014, there was a European Council on industrial policy, and we saw the documents or the conclusions, because you write conclusions before you go to the meeting, which is the typical thing you do. And we said, well, there's no. This is 2014. Yeah. There's no 3D printing in there. There's no digitization in there. It was really pathetic. So we put all of that stuff in. It was all took it out again. Said, well, is that the cutting edge for a European industrial policy? Now, obviously, that sounds very quaint. It's only 4 years ago. But if you think where we were then, it's we have a big leap to make forward.
Oh, do you have any hope for the European community then?
Well, I mean, now Macron has been quite forceful, and I think he's shown some considerable leadership. Actually, when he took over as Minister of Economic Affairs in France, he took over from Mr. Montebourg, who thought we were all neoliberal fascists. And that was, then suddenly we saw a huge change, basically. France actually starting to support entrepreneurs. At the time, under Hollande, they were still thinking of taxing VC, very harsh tax on VC. So we kind of tried to start a lobby against that with our French startup friends. And but then a real change came. So they started investing in startups. Digitization became a really important topic, and Macron, as a prime minister, has really taken it forward. Also in terms of investments, in terms of looking for collaborations with Germany, has been very forceful. Also in European context and you'll see now that Europe is going to allocate considerably more money to R&D and innovation than it did before. So I think some of that is really now echoing through. And on AI, I think people are now awake and say, well, this is something that if we don't really get our act together here, then we'll be just the consumers of anything that's developed in China, Korea, or in the US. But we really need to get our act together there.
Okay, now talking about blockchain, I mean, blockchain, you have all these ministers together, and they seem to be very much focused on regulating the ICOs and the crypto and that kind of stuff. Do you think there's also some enthusiasm? Is there a broad view of moving forward, or is it more just being careful and trying to protect the current state?
Stating that they all care very much about ICOs, I think is largely overstating the issue. I don't think they are mostly aware. But this is a kind of a new thing that is potentially disruptive, and it's not so much the ministers. I think it's the central banks and our regulators that are taking a very cautious look at this, and they will be the ones briefing the ministers. So, and if the Minister of Finance suddenly says something, everybody always believes what the Minister of Finance says. So it's really important that we get our regulators to take an open attitude towards this, to allow this development to go further, and then to maybe put up some boundaries that are very pro-innovation, and that means that they have to be very well aware of what's going on. I don't know, is the Nederlandse Bank here? I have him, yeah, excellent. So. No, I just came from Singapore, where there the regulator MAS is really, I think, quite exemplary. They got this sandbox. Yeah, we got a sandbox too, but people have to actually play in the sandbox, and the games that come out actually need to be absorbed somewhere. And I think they've done a good job there. I think what they're doing in Switzerland from the regulatory side is quite interesting. So there are good examples. You don't have to invent the wheel anymore. We can actually see how it's done.
Yeah. So you've seen, how do you look at that role of ICOs and the funding of startups? It came up, it's now bigger than the VC worldwide. In Holland, it's still, we have been able to find 7 of them and to get an ICO, and we had to vet them, we had to also refuse a few, but not so much, because the Dutch are very serious about how they do ICOs. They all want to be doing a proper job. But what do you see as a potential role for funding for the whole ICO phenomenon?
Well, I think there's a big role. It's a question really about smart funding, not smart funding, how you're engaging your community. I think, especially in the latter, I think that's really important. I mean, that you already have an enthusiastic client base once you get your investment. That's very different than if you have a VC-funded model. But then the VC bring business networks that the ICO might not bring. So I mean, I think you'll get blended models. But the innovation is good, because the innovation also puts the VC again on their toes, so that they have to innovate and provide more services, and not just the providers of capital and can then sit back and start harassing the management. Now they actually have to lean in and provide them with advice, contacts, and business.
Okay, so that is potentially very positive. So if we cannot have too much harsh regulation, while on the other hand also to try to avoid all kinds of scam and all kinds of disillusional people, that there is some kind of control system. Do you see that in front of you? I mean, what is Singapore? What is Singapore doing with that sandbox, and how does it work to regulate it not too much, but in a positive way?
Well, I think this is much more than just the ICOs or blockchain. It's about all new technology. We saw it with Uber and with Airbnb. That they had big. Well, basically they entered the market and then they got into trouble. A country like Estonia has been very forthcoming in negotiating a solution to, then they both signed up to it, so they were compliant, and then they could develop their business, and that's been very, very good and very, very proactive and constructive. We had the same here in the beginning, and now I think we're kind of pulling back a bit from that. So I think the challenge is and will continue to be how are regulators and governments dealing with new technologies and new businesses that actually change relationships, where these businesses or business models do not fit the legacy system, and that's going to hurt. I mean, it's understandable that taxi drivers are angry, and it's going to change things. Blockchain, I think I'm convinced, is going to dismediate a lot of companies, organizations. and they will have to adjust, and that adjustment is going to hurt some, and it's going to benefit others. And, but if you only regulate to retain the legacy, then I think you are on the wrong foot.
Okay. How are we doing in the startup scene at the moment in the Netherlands? How would you analyze that?
Well, I guess seeing how you were bitching about what's going on in the Netherlands, every good remark made from India, immediately you made a remark how horrible it is in the Netherlands.
No,
I have now
no. Did I do that?
I feel compelled to actually give a bit of pushback. No, I think
I'm very positive about Holland. I think we're doing a great job.
No, actually, we're in the lucky position that we don't need vision or leadership to still do quite well. And I think it's
so that
talking about decentralization, right?
Yeah, decentralization.
I think we love that. You know, we love visionary leadership, and I think what Macron is doing is fantastic, and it helps to have focus points. And but on the whole, I think what is really cool in the Netherlands, it's a country that is very innovative in its nature. We always challenge the authority, which is a pain in the butt. Or if you have a hierarchy, because there's always somebody who's going to tell you or ask you why should I do this? Why should you say just shut up and do it? You know, but the Netherlands they don't like that. So there's always someone who thinks about a better way to do it, or a cheaper way, or more efficient way. Our challenge is then executing. So we love the brilliant concept, but then execute.
Proof of concept. We're a proof of concept nation.
Execute and grow. And but now with a company like ADN, and we've got a number of others that are kind of on the verge of kind of breaking through. Some of them are so well financed that we don't hear about them, like Elasticsearch, but they will probably IPO eventually. And then we have the role models to show that actually it's there's some very cool companies being built here, alongside the breadth of, and I think you mentioned it, we are a funny hybrid between a small and a big country. We are quite remarkable in that as a country of only 17 million people, we are playing in nearly every sector. I mean, we're big in agtech, we're in civil engineering, in semiconductors, and robotics. You just go on and on and on, but it's very thin. You know, if you have, there's an acoustics group in Twente, and there are 5 people, and they're doing amazing stuff. But in Beijing, there you got 500 people doing acoustic stuff, and eventually numbers do count. So to stay on top, it requires that we need to go scale. Well, we choose. We have to choose. We have to focus, and that's difficult because we do want to be the best in everything, and the risk is you end up being relatively good in everything, but not the best. Okay.
Hey, there's all these new technologies you're talking about, AI and big data and 3D printing and blah blah. Is blockchain just one of those in a group of 10? Is there anything special about the blockchain, or is it just one of the technology we need to pay attention to?
No, I think it's a foundational technology. I think a lot of it, because it changed the paradigm in which we organize a society. So I think no, it's much deeper than that. You could say it's a bit like 3D printing to manufacturing, which also decentralizes manufacturing. But I think it's also because it's much more scalable and it's software, there's no hardware involved. I think it's for me it would be the next wave of the internet. So it's really I think it's really very fundamental and transformational.
Yeah, the theme was going from proof of concept to production. Did you see enough moving forwards in that direction?
In this specific area?
Yeah, in the last year. I mean, Gartner, he was there this morning, and they said they basically interviewed 3,000 CIOs, and they were all working on blockchain, but only 1% was doing something, and they were doing all small projects, And we basically had the whole day all kinds of examples of people who really put things into production and not only in proof of concept. Did you see that around you? That those blockchain projects are coming above the floor?
Yeah, in the startup domain, yes. In government, much less so. I mean, I think we see a lot of pilots, and those pilots are really good. But I personally don't believe in a pilot if you don't commit to executing on a successful outcome. I mean, the pilot is there to test, right? But you test something. You don't just pilot to pilot. because then it becomes I don't know, marketing of, you know, see how cool we are innovative, we do blockchain. I think that's maybe culturally that's interesting.
It was a start.
Yeah, but it's but it's start is a start to something, right? It's not, otherwise it's a blip. That's like a start that stops. A start should be beginning of a process, and I think what we need to do much more is to invest in these proof of concept, but to actually go to full-scale implementation, and that's where things become really interesting.
Okay. Next year, this time, where should we be as the Netherlands with blockchain projects?
Well, I guess you have to have a bigger hall. We should all be here, right? That's your ambition.
Yeah, we'll be here and we'll talk about, and we want to move forward. We take the best cases, but what kind of examples do you think we should have at that time? I mean, we had Everledger. Basically, they had millions of the diamonds on the blockchain, and she was an Australian London entrepreneur, female entrepreneur, and she's really having 40 people. She's putting lots of things on the blockchain. She's really doing things which really disrupts the world and makes it a lot better to function.
Okay, so what I mean,
will we have that kind of stuff in a year?
well, I mean, the example we just heard about identity, I think those are really, really important things, and there I really hope that some of those will actually be reality. And we've discussed that in the context of St. Martin. You just cannot imagine what happens if you don't have an identity. And I think the example that was just given, I find is very I mean, I don't know how you felt about that, but it's if you just feel that you're in a job, you're doing well, you're integrated, and suddenly you go to basically you think, well, I'm going to get another stamp in my passport, and they say, well, okay, hand in your passport, hand in your driver's license, hand in your bank account. We're going to put you in Ter Apel, and everybody, I think Ter Apel exists to get people out of there, and then you get locked up there for 2 years because you can't prove who you are. I mean, that's pathetic. That's where the sovereign system of states fails. So if you can use the blockchain there to establish your self-sovereign identity, and that actually gives you access to bank accounts or to money, not maybe a bank account, just to money that you're entitled to, or to all kinds of services that you are entitled to. I think that's really fundamental. And that might be disruptive for states that always are they have the sovereign authority over their citizens, and here the citizen becomes their own entity, connecting to the kind of services and the kind of values that they choose. I think that's profound, and something that I would hope that in a year's time we'll see many more of those applications.
Okay, Badar, can you come with the prize?